And thank you very much for watching. So we are going through lesson 7 of this cursed course, and it's after 11:30 at night my time, so we're not doing it for very long today, but we're doing the November thing. So wow, I'm really tired. Yeah, we're doing this every day, even if it's for like 5 minutes. So, we're just trying to get through this stupid course. We're 13 hours and 17 minutes into a 32-hour course, and so we will get through this someday.
Hit confirm, and if we look, and nothing's going to happen on our front end because we didn't tell our front end to do anything once we confirm. But if we go to our blockchain, we can...
Also, I had to rewind this because I was having an issue yesterday where the transaction was going through, but there was an error in hard hat. But since the transaction went through, I decided we're just gonna go on with our lives. So that's probably the best option. My cat is contemplating ending my life because we are in. You want to tell your own side of the story? It's time for treats and for us to go to bed, but I need to get through at least 3 minutes of this course, babe, and then we can talk to my cat, call him my cat, babe. I can go to bed, and we'll have done the podcast for November challenge, even though I'm not talking about it on Twitter or advertising it at all. But we are getting through this course, and that is reward on its own.
See, our fund function was called. We've just made our first transaction on a blockchain from our own front end. This is awesome. Great work. But it's probably a little confusing to the user if nothing happens here. They're going to hit the fund function, and it's going to be like, okay, cool. What happens now? We probably want to make it a little bit more obvious that something just happened. And one more thing I want to show you. You don't have to follow along here. If I hit fund, and then I hit reject, it's going to freak out on us and be like, hey, you hit reject. I don't know what to do now. So we're going to make our code a little bit more robust by adding a try catch. So we'll tell JavaScript to try running this transaction.
Okay, so as a part of the troubleshooting, I actually copied and pasted the code. So this is the try and the catch that he was going through, and from what I can see, so if the window Ethereum is not undefined, then we've defined the provider. So if we have a balance, we are console logging the balance. And if not, we will console log the error. And then else, please install MetaMask. So that's fine.
And then if it catches an error, just a console.log that error. So now if I hit fund and I hit reject, it'll still be a little bit mad, but at least we're catching it and it's not going to break and destroy everything. Okay, cool. We've got a transaction response here. And when we hit fund, our front end goes, great, you've funded me. I'm super confused. Oh, one other point, something that you'll probably run into multiple times as we're doing this.
Wow, I struggled so hard with this, and now he goes over it. See, this is why with courses like this, if you're having an issue, you should probably just watch the next couple of minutes. But we figured it out already. If you go to MetaMask and we go to settings, advanced, and then there is a logs, sync, there's a reset account, and you click on this, and then the nonce is reset, and you can do the things again.
If you get an error that looks like this, ETH.js query while formatting outputs from RPC, none's too high, expect none's to be 2, but got 4, you will definitely see this a whole lot. Here's what you do to fix this. The reason this happens is because you've closed your hardhat node and then restarted it. And your hardhat node goes, okay, well, I'm starting fresh, I'm starting from 0, but MetaMask isn't smart enough to know that. What we want to do is we want to come to our MetaMask, we'll hit this big button, we'll go down to settings, we'll go to advanced, and we'll go to reset account. And yes, we're going to reset it. This isn't something ideally that you'd like to do with an actual account with actual money. On a local network, this is fine. Now, if you reset the account and you reset the node, we can go ahead and hit confirm, and it doesn't give us that error anymore. So that's kind of the tip there. You want to reset the nonce so that our MetaMask and our blockchain are in sync with that nonce number. So we have this transaction response, and we probably want our front end to give the user some indication, hey, the transaction went through. So what we want to do is we want to listen to the blockchain for this to finish. So we can either listen for the TX to be mined, or we can listen for an event. We haven't learned about events yet, but we will. So for now, since we haven't learned about events yet, we're just going to listen for the TX to be mined. Or to listen for the transaction to be mined, we're actually going to create a new function called function listen or
Okay, so it's fund. Oh, okay, so this is the connect function. This is the withdraw function, which we are doing after that, so we're just going to so if it's not undefined and we have the provider signer and contract, we've defined the contract, try the transaction response. This, we wait for the transaction mine. Transaction response provider. So we go back to the function. It mines the transaction response hash, return a promise. Okay. I'm going to delete everything that's in here, and we're going to listen to what he's doing and do it at the same time, because I'm understanding what it's doing, but it's way better to do it yourself. So
transaction mine, and this is going to take as input a transaction.
So it takes in a transaction response and then the provider.
Response and a provider. Now you'll notice this isn't an async function. For this section, this is intentional. We don't want this to be an async function, and you'll see why in a second. We're going to be using JavaScript's promise, JavaScript's async functionality to its massive advantage. And this is why JavaScript actually works so well in the front end, is because of how it's asynchronous. So we're going to create this function, listen for transaction to be mined. We're going to await in our fund function. And we're going to have this return a promise. Let's go ahead and let's learn how to build this. So we're going to say console.log, string interpolation. We'll say,
so it's console.log, and then the string interpolation, mining, hash, I believe that's what he did before.
Mining, and then in here we'll say transaction response dot hash. All of our transaction response objects have a hash, which just represent that hash. We'll do a couple of ... We'll put in our console here. We're waiting for the transaction to be mined. Then what we're going to do is we're going to return a new promise.
Okay, so returning a new promise.
And the reason we're going to return a promise is because we need to create a listener for the blockchain. That we want to listen for this event to happen, but we want to tell JavaScript, hey, wait for this thing to finish looking. Wait for this thing to finish looking. Now here's where this gets a little bit tricky. In our fund function, after we create the transaction, we basically want to tell JavaScript, hey, wait for this TX to finish. So our code is going to look as simple as await, listen for transaction mine, and we're going to pass.
So I'm pretty sure if we come up here to fund, await, listen for transaction mine, and then literally transaction response and the provider. So I'm not redoing that because it's simple enough.
Pass it the transaction response and our provider. So we're saying, hey, listen for this transaction to finish, and we're using this await keyword because, again, the await keyword says, okay, we're going to stop right here. We're going to stop until this function is completely done. Now, in this listen for transaction of mine, we have to define how we're actually going to listen for this. So we're going to say listen for this transaction to finish. Ethers actually comes with a way for us to listen for transactions and listen for events, which, again, we haven't learned about, but don't worry about that yet. So we can go to the Ethers docs, and we can look up once, contract.once. There's a whole bunch of listeners that we can use to listen for events and listen for different.
So docs.ethers.io. So query filter, listener count, listeners off, on, once, remove all listeners. So I'm guessing it's listeners.
Different things to happen. We can do this thing called provider.once, where we listen for some event and one.
Okay. So it says, subscribe once to event calling listener when the event occurs. So basically, don't listen to it forever. Just listen to it for this one time.
Once that event fires, we call some other function that we've defined. Now, we haven't talked about events yet, and again, don't worry about this quite yet. One of the events that we can wait for is we can just wait for the transaction receipt to finish, right? Because once we get a transaction receipt, that means that the transaction has actually finished going through. So we're going to use this provider.once syntax to wait for the transaction receipt, which is going to be our event, which isn't really an event, but don't worry about that yet. And then we're going to call some listener function that we define. You can also do provider.on, which will trigger any time your event fires. Provider.once just triggers one time. We only care about this transaction going through one time. So we're passing our provider object. So we're going to say provider.once, our event, which is just going to be transaction response of hash, provider.on.
Okay. I feel like we are going to be putting this inside of the try catch, but whatever, we're fine. Provider.once.
transaction response.hash. So once we get this
and comma something
hash, which we'll pretty much get right away, we're going to call our listener function. Now we could create a function listener like this, and then just pass listener in here. But we're going to do an anonymous function here because that's typically what we see as the syntax for these. Oops.
Okay, so we're not actually doing that. We're just going to do this business.
Sorry, we're doing provider.once. To do this anonymous function, we're going to do just 2 little parentheses here and this arrow notation. So this by itself represents an anonymous function. So we're saying, hey, there's some function, it doesn't take any parameters, and it doesn't have any code. This arrow function, this whole thing is saying this is an anonymous function. So we're saying provider.once, transaction hash happens. Here's the function that you want to execute. It doesn't do anything right now, but let's have it do something. So once this transaction.response finishes, we're going to take a transaction receipt as an input parameter. Or our callback function or our listener function. And all we're going to do is we're going to say console.log completed with, and a little string interpolation.
Okay, so console.log
transaction receipt.confirmations. And then completed with transaction receipt.confirmations. So once the
confirmations.
provider.once sees that there's a transaction hash, it's going to give as an input parameter to our listener function the transaction receipt. Kind of that same syntax that we've been seeing this whole time. Once the transaction response finishes, we get the transaction receipt, and we can do stuff with it. And we see how many block confirmations it has. For us, this pretty much should always be 1. Now, if we save this, we go back to our front end, and we hit fund, it's going to work. We're going to give the user some indication that it worked, which is great. But it's not really going to work the way that we want it to work. We had this console.log done right after we do the await listen for transaction mine, and we come back and we hit fund, we hit confirm. It actually doesn't go in the order that we want it to go. It goes mining this thing, and then it says done, and then it says completed with 1 confirmation. What's going on here? We should write completed before we write done, because that's the order that we have this in. But it looks like words is going out of order. What's going on here? What's going to happen is when we call listen for transaction mine, our listen for transaction mine function is going to kick off, but it's going to kick off provider.once as its own process. So await listen for transaction mine will kick off the listener, but it doesn't wait for this listener to find the transaction response. So this function will actually finish before provider.once finishes. So after it kicks off the listener, it'll run to the next line of our code, which is console.log done. Our front end will go, oh, you kicked off a listener earlier. Let me go back down and let me recheck to see if it's finished. And if it has finished, I'll go do what it told me to do. And this is where what's known as the event loop kicks in. We don't actually wait for this provider.once to finish. We add this provider.once onto this queue called the event loop, and our front end is going to periodically check back to it to see if it's finished. So we want to adjust our code so we wait for the listener to finish listening, which is where we're going to get into promises here. So what we want to do is we want to adjust this function to now return a promise. And we're going to use this syntax a couple times in the future. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, hey, we want to wait for the listener to finish listening. We're going to wrap this whole thing into a promise. And we're going to say return new promise. And a promise takes a function itself as an input parameter. So again, we'll use kind of this anonymous.
Okay. Return new promise. I think it's one of those things where, like, you want to make sure that the object isn't being overwritten every time this is being called, so you have to do new. But yeah, just nestle that inside. Oh, baby. Okay, so kitty. Both of you. We have like 2 more minutes on this until we get to lesson 9. Okay, we're almost lesson 9, which means we can go on to the rest of this stuff, but I'm also pretty much finished with the heavy lifting of the front ends of the programming for this, I think. So we'll see.
Anonymous function notation, and it'll take 2 input parameters, resolve and reject. So
Okay. So I think that's just resolve, reject.
resolve says, hey, if this promise works correctly, call this resolve function. And for us, this promise is going to be done when the listener finishes listening. And then we would reject if there was some type of timeout. We're not going to write the reject function, but in the future, if you were to do this for production, you'd add some timeout as the reject parameter. Basically, you're saying, hey, once the listener finishes listening, we're going to resolve. And if it takes too long, we're going to say, screw you, you took too long. And instead of closing it off here, we're going to close it off around this provider thing. So we're going to say, return new promise, resolve, reject. And only once this transaction gets fired are we going to resolve this promise, like so. So what is happening here? So we're going to put the resolve inside of this provider.once. So we're saying once.
Okay. So once the provider.once. Okay.
This transaction hash is found, then we're going to call this function. We're going to say console.log, and then we're going to resolve. So this promise only returns once a resolve or a reject is called, and we're telling it only resolve, only finish this function once transaction response.hash is found, because it's going to be inside of these little squiggly parentheses for provider.once. The promise right now only resolves after it's fired its event here. If this was really confusing, just copy paste this and move on. We're getting a little bit deeper into front end stuff here. So hopefully this was clear. If not, definitely jump into the GitHub discussions to start asking about this stuff. But now that we've updated this, we can come back to our front end, we can hit the fund button, and hopefully this time everything will go in order. We'll hit confirm, we see.
Okay, so what he did was mining completed, and then inside of the fund function, and then here we do console.log. Done. Okay, so this is hard hat node. We're gonna go live over here. We are actually going to go into, well, plain HTML 888, but we already know that MetaMask is gonna hate us forever. So we go to settings and advanced, reset the account just on principle of it, connect it, do 2, inspect console, put all of these, and we'll just do fund. It'll come up here, yeah. And then so we are funding with 2. We are mining it. We've completed with 1 confirmations. And then we are doing done. So it is in the correct order at the very least. And if we go to MetaMask and we do this, it has the activity and it's green. So we're good.
Mining completed, and then we see done. And the reason for this is because, again, our await keyword is now waiting. It says, oh, you're returning a promise. I need to await. I need to wait for it to
Still has this dumb error. I'm not sure.
resolve or reject. And we only resolve the promise once our provider finds this transaction hash and this transaction receipt. This is this listen for transaction mine. In future sections, all of this is going to be abstracted away for us, so life is going to be much easier, but it is important to understand what's actually going on here. Awesome. So now we're giving the front end some indication of what's going on. Our fund function is done. Well, no, not really. Why not? Well, because right now we're hard coding the ETH amount to 0.1. And on the front end, we probably don't want to hard code it. We probably want to allow users to fund as much or as little as they want. So we actually need to change this from just a button to a input form. So to do this, we're going to go back over to our HTML. So we'll go back to index.html. And we're going to change this fund section here. We're going to add some form information. So we're going to keep this button as it is, but we're going to add like a little text box to input as much ETH as they want. So I'm going to create a label. We're going to say it's for, it's going to be fund. And this label we're going to say is ETH amount.
Fine. So here we'll just put the reason why we do this is so yeah, we have a 98%. And then 100% for the accessibility and best practices. SEO. We're not doing good. Okay, so we're missing meta stuff, but that's fine. I'm just showing you that labels are important for these type of fields.
Then we're going to close the label. This is basically just going to create a label. And if we go back to our front end, we now just have this ETH amount label that isn't labeling anything. Now we're going to create an input, and we're going to give it an ID of ETH amount. And we're going to give it a placeholder of 0.1. And then we're going to close the input. So now if we flip to our front end, we have ETH amount labeling this.
That's fine.
Little text box with a placeholder of 0.1. And we can add stuff in here, blah, 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 whatever. And one more thing, if you have some tags, but you don't put anything in between them, you can actually shorten it by just putting the little closing thing at the back of it like this. So if you don't have anything between your tags, you can just close them like this. These two are equivalent. Boom, 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 boom. Those are the same thing. Great. When we call fund, right now we're calling fund and we're not passing any parameters. Let's update our fund to no longer be hard coding ETH amount in here. And we'll have our fund function populated by whatever we put in this ETH amount input box. In our fund function, instead of saying const ETH amount equals 0.
Yeah.
Point 1, we'll grab it from this ETH amount ID. So we'll say document dot get element by ID ETH amount dot value. So we're going to grab whatever value is in this input box here. Now, in our index.js, we have console.log funding with ETH amount. If in our front end we do 1.7 and we hit fund, we now see in our console.log it says funding with 1.7, and we'll get 1.7 in our little fund section. Confirm, it'll mine it, it'll complete it, and then say done. Awesome. So now we've added a little text box here so people can fund as much or as little as they want. Perfect. This whole thing can kind of be considered a form. There's also a form tag, but we're going to just use this for now. All right, great. We're doing a lot of funding, right? And we keep funding our contract with more and more ETH, and we keep adding more and more stuff. We probably want a button to keep track of how much is actually in here. So let's just add a really simple balance button. And let me actually just move this down to the bottom here. Much better. So we'll say button, ID.
I'm going to do a div here. We're going to put these buttons and then tomorrow night we will go ahead and finish this because, and by tomorrow night I mean during the day, because I don't think I have like I'm neither in Twitter Spaces nor doing the training, and they haven't given me work lately, which is a concerning thing, but we're in the middle of a company transition, and the lead dev is really busy and doesn't have time to give us tasks, so may as well do training, right? So I'll do it. I've been feeling a little guilty. I talked a big talk, and I got through like 10 hours of this in a week, but now I actually am trying to stay employed. So anyway, I've been doing this for a little bit. Thank you. I was looking at the 12:32 this, and I was like, yes, we'll just go until that, and then we'll be done with lesson 8, but actually it's the 13:41. That is our new goal, but we are less than 10 minutes into it, and I could probably just delete the withdraw function and the balance over here so that we can do it from scratch, but yeah, why don't we? That way, tomorrow we still have these defined. Yeah, so like these on clicks are working. So yeah, we'll just go ahead and continue and just follow the tutorial tomorrow, and I'm not expecting it to give me any issues, honestly. We've got the MetaMask connected and the transaction worked, so there's nothing really challenging to the rest of this. Anyway, tomorrow's Friday. I don't generally code on Fridays, but we're going to power through this because we are in the podcasting thing for November. So I will see you later. Bye.